it's actually a really great pleasure and an honor to have Amra. She's the director of the Center for Cultural Heritage at the International Forum Bosnia. And she's also an expert in managing diverse projects of integrating cultural heritage into post-war recovery, not only in Bosnia, but also Kosovo and Palestine. She has worked as a consultant for UNESCO, for the World Bank, for ICOMOS, and many other international organizations. She has also taught at different universities. She's taught at the International University of Sarajevo, and she has been a guest lecturer both at European and American universities. She's an author of a number of academic papers and books. So as you can see, Amra is like a real expert on the topic. And I've also witnessed her on different Al Jazeera, I think, and a few other programs, both locally and internationally. So I know that she's a great speaker, and I really, really look forward to her lecture tonight. So tonight, Amra will be talking about building resilience through rebuilding heritage, coping with war trauma in Bosnia. And so we're kind of continuing with this post-war theme and culture in many senses, which we have already started with Azra last week. So Amra, welcome. Once again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And so the floor is yours, and we look forward to your lecture.
Thank you very much, Leila, Claudia, for inviting me, and good evening to all our listeners, if some of them are in different time zones. I would like to say hello to everyone. It's a great pleasure to participate to this wonderful project that Kuma International is in fact working in Bosnia, and I have become familiar with what you are doing long before you invited me to speak. So it has been a great honor, and I really gladly accept to be with you. Tonight I will speak not only about the present and future, but about the past that is, in a way, wanted by the traumatized Bosnian community to be brought back to their present, and also to become the future. So this is somehow, and I will try to show how the basic meaning of the word resilience that enters our life every day, and it becomes one of those words that are very popular, especially in 2020, replacing some other very frequent words. So as my presentation is going live, not pre-recorded, I decided to establish at least this way of direct contact with you. I hope that it will not go over the time. I'm very well known as a bad time manager, I must say, and especially when I become passionate about what I'm working at or what I'm talking about. So please, Leila, feel free to warn me about the time if it is over an hour, as you suggested.
Don't worry, Amra. You take your time, as much time as you would like.
Thank you so much. So I will start with a presentation. The title that in fact we agreed upon is Building Resilience Through Rebuilding Heritage, and this talk about cultural heritage will be framed in the context of violence against people and place, and role of heritage in coming to terms with social trauma. It is not heritage-centered, as all my work of the heritage specialist and heritage researcher has been always people-centered, or even more precisely, person or community-centered. At the very beginning, in order to avoid any plasticity in the reception of the keywords which I'm going to use, I will reflect on the four terms, probably the most important for this lecture tonight, and even for your month, Architecture Month at Kuma International, because some of them were flagship words in the previous presentations, as I could notice. And I enjoyed very much that all these lectures are somehow building upon each other, although without any kind of previous consultation between the speakers. So these 4 words are heritage, community, trauma, and resilience. I use the notion of heritage as it is given in the Faro Convention from 2005, the framework doctrinal document of Council of Europe, which I worked on together with other 15 European experts. And that's one of those strongly enriching projects for the people working on it. Something that really that shifted my paradigms concerning heritage and working with it. The Faro Convention points to the interactive nature of the cultural heritage, recognizing that it is defined and redefined by human actions, and that it must not be perceived as either static or immutable. This opens approach to heritage, which is not important because of material and substance, but because of the values that people attach to it, and because of its significance for the people. And it is, what I would like to stress, ever-evolving concept. So it is a concept that goes against the conservative approach of immutability of the heritage. I used Google Viewer in grants just to show that some of the words that we use together that entered into the theory and practice today are pretty new, or their semantic charging is totally different from what they were at the beginning of their use. So I use this diagram from 16th century until today, just to show that in 1930s, the first use of the word cultural heritage occurred. So it is the word, the construct from the beginning of 20th century or the first half of 20th century. We can say that it is in fact something that also resulted the trauma experience after the Great War and some kind of attempts to cope with this trauma. The peak of the word, in fact, happens at the beginning. The most frequent use of the word happens at the beginning of the 21st century. So the other word that I would like to focus or channel your attention to is the word community. And it's extremely important to avoid any kind of misunderstanding concerning the use community. So I used here some kind of etymological sort of research of the semantic feeling of the word. It is of Latin origin, although the similar word was used in Greek, and it occurs in some church texts and so on. But what is interesting, some etymologists say that the word is composed of 2 components. One, com, that means together with, and the other, munis, that is derived from the verb munire, to strengthen, to defend. So it means to strengthen or to defend together. People that together defend something. That is community in one sort of explanation or understanding of its etymology. The other explanation is done through the understanding that the second component of the word is munus, which in Latin means duty. So it's a group of people with the same duty or with some kind of reciprocity in the relations, receiving and giving to each other, having the duty of receiving and giving through some kind of reciprocity. For example, the opposite word of community is immunity. So immunity is an ability to receive, sort of responding to, offering without accepting it. And this slide shows how this word in fact changed or developed its semantic charging through the history. So the word community is probably the oldest word in the Google books that we can find. We can see that it is even that it is present even before 16th century, and of course that it has its peak at the beginning of 21st century in the Google books. The concept of heritage community is treated as self-defining, and I am using also the concept of heritage community in this lecture. That is, in fact, that we have defined this group of experts in the Faro Convention. So it is, in fact, self-defining concept by valuing and wishing to pass on specific aspects of cultural heritage in interaction with others. An individual becomes part of that community through this process. A heritage community is thus defined as a variable geometry without reference to ethnicity or other rigid communities. Such a community may arise out of common interest, shared human values, or another type. Heritage communities is a term which is linked with the very idea of cultural heritage, or even culture in general. For there can be no cultural life without a community, as Universal Declaration on Human Rights states clearly in its Article 27. We are now coming to the third word that is extremely important and linked with what we are talking during this month, and it's trauma. The Google records that the use of the word trauma in the books is recordable from 1714. So it entered the use in 18th century, and it appears for the first time denoting something different from its meaning, wide meaning today. Until 1950, until the middle of 20th century, it was mainly linked with the physical injuries, bodily physical injuries. From 1951 and on, the concept of psychological trauma is dominating the Ingram records. And I would like to focus your attention that at the threshold of 21st century or at the end of 20th century, the social trauma has been introduced as a category into the vocabulary. And the trauma has not got its plasticity. It still means injury, and it is understood as injury and some kind of the consequences of that injury, either to community or to any kind of unit or entity, including human bodies, human souls, and the social systems. One of the books that has impressed me concerning understanding the meaning of trauma in the societies is this one that was published in 2003, whose title is Trauma and the Memory of Politics by wonderful Jenny Atkins. And Jenny Atkins, in her book, in fact, talks about the social trauma and memorialization of trauma. and concealing the trauma of the society and even individuals, a person, after the war and the different kind of such social stresses that people suffer by power, by structures in power, through victorious events, through memorializations, and especially through memorials that some of speakers were talking about, and even challenging this kind of memorialization. So the concealing trauma and not talking about it and going through it, processing it, in fact, makes the reoccurrence of trauma and its consequences for the society possible in a deeper and more serious way than the stage in which traumatized people find themselves after the stressful events. That's why I would like to argue that not leaving the past, not leaving the past, and talking about the future and development before processing the past and understanding what are the ways of resilient life is in fact a way to make a resilient people, resilient persons and societies and communities, in sense in which I talk about the communities. And then we come to the keyword of the tonight or this evening lecture and the whole Kuma International Month, resilience. The etymology of the word resilience and its foundation, semantic charging, as a capacity to recover after trauma, brings this word in close relation with reconstruction, and especially with reconstruction of cultural heritage. In fact, the word is composed again from two components of the Latin words, prefix re, which means back, like in reconstruction, in recovery, always back, and salire, which means to jump, to leap, to bounce back. So the word, fundamental meaning of the word resilience is, in fact, to be able to receive or to regain the condition, to receive or to regain back the condition, the pre-stress condition, the pre-trauma condition. And when I talk about resilience, I will talk about the resilience of people, resilience of community, although the word got its different semantic chargings. I dare to state that the word resilience has become very frequent in the 2020 discourses, especially in social but also in urban studies, and that it tends to become one of those plastic words, such as sustainability, for example. When I say plastic words, I mean those words which receive diverse semantic chargings. The users take their meanings as given without trying, to go back to etymology or to understand, giving them different kind of semantic chargings. And the users put them in different contexts without referring either to etymology or to some kind of conventional meaning. So it's extremely important now, when this word becomes so frequent in our use, and I think that 2020 is the year where resilience is one of the key words in all these sociological researches and also urban and I may say even architectural researches, that we should avoid the plastic nature of the word and go to the conventionalizing the word, trying to find the conventional meaning in this wide use. So the word, in fact, started being used in natural sciences, in physics, for the items which have ability to go back to the condition, pre-stress condition. Then it went to the different kind of the psychological, then ecological, etc. Discourses. And this edited volume by Ramp, Enrich, and Raumann, published by Springer in 2019, contains texts that are exploring the semantic path of the word resilience and explains its use as a social construct. It contains important articles which settle the word in the contemporary theoretical vocabulary. I would like especially to focus your attention to the article by Bosch and Binder and Rathgerber. In their article, the resilience is defined as a characteristic of a person or a unit which enables them to maintain their identity and even emerge strengthened when faced with the unusual stressful situations. So this introductory sort of explanation of how I will use these words through the tonight's presentation and how I, in fact, will imply them into the speech, I would like to go into the sort of understanding of the meaning of the war in our societies, in the world today, and for the persons. And the war that we have to not to leave, that talks about the war. Why? First of all, referring to something that happened in 1932, when Albert Einstein was asked by the League of People to write a letter to a person of his choice and to start some kind of a correspondence with that person after choosing the topic that he considers the most appealing. So Albert Einstein decided to write a letter to Sigmund Freud. And their correspondence that started was about the question, why war? Einstein prompts Freud, stating that war is the most insistent of all the problems civilization has to face. 9 decades after that, we can testify that the question points to the most appealing problem of today as well. And just to prove that statement, I would like to share with you the map, which is a GIS presentation of the Global Peace Index for 2018. For 2020 is not different too much. This Global Peace Index is a result of research conducted by Institute for Economics and Peace based in Canada. The green color indicates those small parts of the globe where the state of the peace is high. So the state of the peace in the world is at the level that is really indicating that the war or absence of peace is the most appealing question today. So comparing 2020 with 2018, we can say that this index shows that the world is less peaceful today than at any time in the last decade. This Institute of Economics, in fact, gave us index of measuring economic impact of violence in the period from 2007 to 2019. So if you see that almost 15 trillions, or it is not easy to say almost, when trillions are at the stage, it's 14.53 trillions of dollars is the cost or the impact of violence in the world. It is not difficult to calculate how many 100,000 years hunger can be expelled from the world for the cost of 1 year of the economic impact of violence in the world. My calculation that it is 300,000 years without her if the peace is in the world. So this is extremely appealing economical data. And when we are talking about that, there is this rhetoric question that is the starting question in one of the UNESCO documents. Why should we care for monuments? The lives are lost. Families are becoming homeless. Children are starving and being crippled. This UNESCO dilemma is in fact bringing us to repeat the question, why should we care for monuments? And can we go to the conclusion on the significance of heritage for the people, for victims of both those who were targeted and those who were targeting, understanding all of those that are included in any kind of conflict as the victims. And this is linked with the ever-evolving questions on memory and capacity to be in charge of our lives. And being in charge of our lives is in fact a capacity of being resilient. Milan Kundera, in fact, answers in his wonderful book of Love and Forgetting to the question, how do some monuments become so socially powerful that people seek to destroy them? The first step in liquidating people, he says, is to erase its memory, destroy its books, its culture, its history. Then you have somebody write new books, manufacture new culture, invent a new history. Before long, the nation will begin to forget what it is and what it was. So this is, again, this Milan Kundera's sort of explanation is a sort of contribution to understanding how liquidating people's memory, pushing people into oblivion, is in fact destroying its resilience or any kind of ability to build resilience. The United Nations has defined transitional justice as one of the sort of tools of getting resilience as the full range of processes and mechanisms associated with the society's attempt to come to terms with the legacy of large-scale past abuses in order to ensure accountability, serve justice, and achieve reconciliation. They should be specific, context responding, and they should exist until the consequences of the trauma are mitigated and minimized. In order to explore if any dialectic link between heritage and transitional justice exists, it's important to explore the link between the crimes such as genocide, ethnic cleansing, etc., and heritage destruction, and not push this into the concealing haven. Of course, this is the one of the video that almost everyone knows, the symbolic ones. Let me try to read, no. But as you know the video, I do not know how to sort of start it. Let me try once again. No. I will continue with my sort of reflection to what's happened in Mostar. The victims do not have any dilemma when heritage is destroyed. They testify that destruction of heritage is the grievous loss. I did not cry. I simply turned into the stone. I could not move, as I did not exist. I knew that they destroyed bridge to destroy us, our spirit. That is how one of the Mostar citizens, Shamsuddin, talks about his feelings. Suad, an architect from Stolac, recalls the summer day in 1993 when she observed the flames and explosions swallowing Čaršijska Mosque from 1519, just before she was forced to leave her home together with her 86-year-old mother and 11-year-old daughter. She remembers only her head pulsing hysterically with the only one thought: we will rebuild it. So that's the thought that was pulsing in the heads of people in Mostar, of people in the world when the flames gutting Sarajevo National Library in Vijećnica, when the final hit, in fact, caused the collapse of the Mostar Bridge, when the villages and cities across Bosnia were being turned into the dust. The photos at the screen are just vignettes that even cannot be illustrations of the factual destruction aligned with human suffering in Bosnia. It took 5 years after the war before some sites could be visited by official experts due to the threat of exclusivists, hardliners, and even official local policies. And this is monastery in Žitomislići at the day when I first visited it. And not to mention the rights of uprooted community. These are fragments that Nermina Katkic, who is tonight with us, I noticed that she is among the listeners, was touching while trying to reassemble them, while we were trying to build resilience through rebuilding mosques in Foča. 16 mosques. This is in fact in Banja Luka, but the similar fragments were in Foča when they were working. And Medina Hadžihasanović Katana was one of those who was working with these fragments, and also some of her colleagues. Adams defines destruction of cultural heritage in Bosnia as the violent efforts to remake the world in another image. Numbers make abstract the destruction that was planned, selective, imbued with pseudo-ritual character and performed from proximity. After the destruction, in many cases, the blasted or burnt remains were removed from the sites of destroyed buildings and then thrown into the cultural heritage mass graves, which were usually hardly accessible. During Amra Hadžimuhamedović's appearance as an expert witness at the International Court of Justice in the case brought by Bosnia and Herzegovina against Serbia and Montenegro for violations of the Genocide Convention, but he, Andres, was interrupted by Judge Rosalie Higgins, president of International Justice Court, who warned him that he was straying beyond his testimony as an expert and instructing him to confine himself to that and not to facts or alleged facts that go beyond that. Riedenmeier was interrupted by Judge Higgins just after he had referred to the killing of 65 non-Serb civilians in the ruins of the demolished Catholic Church in Sasine, Sanski Most, on 21st September 1995, and their subsequent burial in a mass grave on the site of the church. Can heritage destruction be considered as a crime? It is an old question that has already received resolution. The crimes relating to cultural heritage and religious property are included in the statutes and consequently in the indictments and verdicts of International Crime Tribunal for former Yugoslavia. Case by case, it has been established that destruction of cultural heritage is aligned with the ethnic cleansing and represents persecution and crime against humanity, and even act of genocide, as John Hocking stated. Where there is a cultural destruction, there may be genocide. The destruction of home and homeland was also performed through rape and the destruction of domestic architecture. The persistence of cultural memory through the symbolic and physical forms of the house-related rituals, and women's role therein is a noticeable characteristic of Bosnian landscapes. The systematic violations of both women and houses in Bosnia is one of the major manifestations of nationalist programs and their associated virulent masculinity. This targeting speaks of sophisticated knowledge in the chartings of the war. It petitioned, would the knowledge of post-war heritage restoration be as sophisticated and systematic? Although the earliest official international documents on restoring life in Sarajevo, for example, did not include culture or destroyed cultural heritage as a priority, from the very outset of the siege, culture was established as a fundamental means of survival and resistance by the citizens of Sarajevo. That was the culture, in fact, was that agent that gave the hope of resilience, of possibility to go back to the safe and better past condition from the present that was unmanageable, that was horrible. Caring for heritage was a survival method. It was incorporated into cultural events, concerts, theater plays, poetry, and literary meetings, exhibitions that took place under candlelight in the theaters and galleries of Sarajevo or at improvised cultural venues, usually at the ruins of cultural heritage sites. Here is Susan Sontag in 1993 in the Sarajevo City Hall. These cultural rituals, a kind of archaeological backdrop of a disappeared world from before and beyond the siege, produced a wholly new dimension of aesthetics, where reality and the surreal switched places. They also served to defend the dignity of the participants and at the same time to encode the symbolic meaning of sublimated, heroic sacrifice into the remains of destroyed buildings. This is showing exhibition of Libeus Woods that our colleague Tanovic mentioned during her presentation in Olympic Museum, in ruins of Olympic Museum in 1993. Sarajevo is still in the post-war recovery stage, and I consider that this stage started in 2014, and that is probably the most important post-war recovery stage. It continues, and it is probably the most threatening recovery stage for the achieving resilience in Sarajevo. It is faced with numerous consequences of the war. And that brings me to the statement that Sarajevo is still in the condition of trauma. Its urbanity is restored, we can say, through the previous 4 phases. And Sarajevo is receptible for the new development. It is receptible for the careful new development, not development that goes on and that is somehow directed to the concealing nature of the trauma. As trauma is still the Sarajevo condition, the new development has to take into the consideration all the possibilities to process the trauma through this development and to achieve the state of the condition of the resiliency and resilient society in the Sarajevo cultural environment, as Faro Convention defines these environments. However, this slow recovery of Sarajevo through the previous 4 phases until 2014 enabled this restoration of the urbanity that was in fact attacked during the war. The urbanity was the target. And I just would like to quote a filmmaker from Homs who visited Sarajevo during the Sarajevo Film Festival and who said, "I dream of my home city becoming like Sarajevo in 20 years' time." So this important phase of the Sarajevo post-war recovery, in fact, has a responsibility, or all of us have a responsibility, not to ruin the level of resilience that we have achieved through slow recovery, where the influx and rule of the capital, money, finances, power was under some kind of control because of the low influx. The war in Bosnia came to an end with an international conflict resolution agreement that is called Dayton Peace Accord. The very heart of the agreement, Annexes 6, 7, and 8, are dealing with the mutually interconnected issues of human rights, the return of refugees and displaced persons and cultural heritage respectively. Annex 8 of the Dayton Accord, officially titled Agreement on the Commission to Preserve National Monuments, has become a significant stamp of uniqueness of the peace settlement due to the fact that cultural heritage was recognized for the first time in modern international conflict resolution policy as one of 11 paramount agents for the establishment of sustainable peace. Or I would say, because the sustainability has been recently considered as a too static term, and resilience as some kind of open and more more applicable for this kind of the processes. So maybe we can talk about the resilience, building resilience through implementation of Annex 8. Based on the premises that heritage is not only to be a subject of transitional justice, but it has capacity to be its tool. I argue that participative restoration of heritage has both healing and reconciling power, as it restores the values and memories, re-establishes environment in which people feel safe, and consequently it contributes to the restoration of mutual trust and dialogue between the people after the war. In order to support the argument cases, I will give 2 vignettes from Bosnia. When Stari Most, a bridge in Mostar, was destroyed on November 9, 1993, Bogdan Bogdanović, Belgrade professor, my professor from my master's studies, an impressive person, wrote, I ask myself how the people of Mostar will live without that bridge. They have now lost a part of their being. With a loss like this, people lose their place in time. The new symbolic meaning of linking diversities and reconciling the divisions was impressed into the bridge once it was destroyed. Bridge was charged with the meaning of connecting East and West only once when it collapsed. Before that, no one mentioned East and West and something that was needed to link them. In reconstruction, its reconstruction of the bridge has become a global symbol of transitional justice and reconciliation and putting the hands together, bridging the gap. Since time when experts and divers had identified the fragments of the Mostar Bridge at the bottom of the river bed, and this one fragment, this is the photo that Senada Demirović and Sulejman Demirović sent to me, and credits go to their late father, who was director of Institute for Protection of Cultural Heritage in Mostar, and who in fact was the diver who found and took out from the water this first stone of Mostar Bridge, symbolically starting its reconstruction. So since that time, and the first stones had been pulled out from the water, the broad range of interpretative possibilities raised in the context of rebuilding of the old bridge, and they raised the number of points for discussion. The proposal that arose from the expert discussions ranged from conserving and preserving the ruins as a memorial, through replicating the form of the bridge in contemporary materials, to creating a close or perfect replica of the old bridge. Amali, Blasi, and Hannah, for example, considered that the design objective of the reconstruction was to build new structures similar to the destroyed bridge. And this is their proposal of a new material, concrete, that will be as similar as possible to the destroyed bridge. Andrea Bruno, the other side, considered that the full story should be narrated through the reconstruction. I proposed not to rebuild the bridge as it was, but only to keep the remaining parts as an example to show that we cannot just destroy heritage. I followed the original shape with a metallic structure, some kind of a ghost bridge. I also kept the small bridge that they had built immediately after the destruction to still be able to cross the river. And he suggested that the remains, that the river banks are in fact preserved as they were after the destruction. This means that we could see at the same time the three phases, said Andrea Bruno. The original bridge that was destroyed, the preliminary crossing, and finally the proposed metallic structure of the project. It would be a testimony of the thing that should not be done. Those discussions could be nicely summed up in the following quotation from André Denayer. The study of projects born from reconstruction and the controversies they have raised show that in the area of conservation of monuments, like in politics, it is often necessary to look for a compromise between what is desirable, what is acceptable, and what is achievable. The debate on authenticity and the layers of the memory to be impressed into the reconstructed bridge were influenced influenced by the emotions of the people who wanted the non-old bridge to be restored. They wanted bridge to show resilience, to symbolize resilience, to symbolize their ability to achieve justice through being able to go back to the condition and environment before they were destroyed and defragmented. So it was a symbol of restored framework for the life that they appreciate, for the life from they were suddenly under the pressure pushed out. This shift from the initial determination to keep the ruins as a statement, never forget, to the demand for a complete restoration might be explained by the words of Freud, written in 1916. When once the mourning is over, it will be found that our high opinion of the riches of civilization has lost nothing from our discovery of their fragility. We shall build up again all that war has destroyed, and perhaps on firmer ground and more lastingly than before. The reconstruction of bridge was going in a way of building resilience through rebuilding the bridge. It was some kind of performing the new paradigm of global responsibility for heritage through the involvement of numerous stakeholders led by UNESCO and World Bank. And this process of building resilience was not at the local level. It was not at the national level only. It, in fact, became a global resilience or building resilience attempt. The reconstruction of Old Bridge in Mostar somehow sublimed all the Bosnian heritage destroyed during the war. It was some kind of performing the new paradigm of global responsibility for heritage through the involvement of all these stakeholders. This global determination to restore the site that was charged with the highest symbolic value of a metaphoric bridge encouraged the war-torn communities to look for the restoration of the less visible ruins of heritage, their own metaphoric bridges that would bring them back to their safe homes, to their safe environments, to their safe lives that were interrupted by the war. And this brings us to the second vignette that I have chosen. The restoration of Stolac, emptied from its inhabitants and leveled to the ground, is one of the examples of the participative restoration process from the initial phase. This is the Stolac in 1990, destroyed in 1993, and this is the recording of one part of it in 1996, showing that there was not almost anything intact after this destruction. And we should remember that it was not aerial destruction, no aerial attacks. All houses were destroyed from the proximity. They were in fact stamped as the houses which were not houses, public buildings, religious buildings, and other edifices, as those that were not belonging to the perception of Croatian culture, this reduced, this exclusivist perception of either Croatian or Catholic culture. And those who were in fact destroying them, believing that they are destroying something that was unwanted, some other culture, they in fact did not know, and they have realized through all these years after, that they were destroying themselves as well. So the idea to test the power of heritage in Stolac was born after several attempts by the international community to start return process and after all these several returns had failed. The project started with a survey of the demand of community. And when I would like just to stress that when I say community, I think about the community as I gave the explanation at the very beginning, heritage community. Interlocutors for the study were inhabitants of Stolac, refugees, displaced persons, and those who did not leave the town. When asked about the building whose destruction was the most painful for them, 75% of the respondents said that the destruction of religious buildings, mosques, and the town center was the most traumatic to them. So you can see this yellow sort of pillar at this chart is in fact showing the city center with the central mosque. And for example, my house is this, I don't know if you can see at the screen my arrow, is this blue part pillar at the chart. So the central or visible signs of belonging to cultural environment, to home or to homeland, were in fact the most important for them. And their destruction was the most traumatic. So the chart at this slide illustrates the priorities for reconstruction accorded to the 23 urban ensembles or functions listed. Dominating the entire chart is an unanimous view that the Charshia Mosque and the city center would be the first to be restored. The chart also shows that this should be followed by the reconstruction of private houses, then by the other 3 mosques and the marketplace. Most, almost 60% respondents opted for the Charshia Mosque, followed by their own house and industrial facilities to be restored. When asked about the methods of reconstruction, 96% of respondents said they would reconstruct the destroyed sites as they were prior to destruction. And there is a small sort of anecdote or the story. One of my interlocutors wrote a letter to me at the back side of the questionnaire that was in fact filled with all these questions that I used for my survey. And he said he was 50 years old, a male person, expelled from Stolac, who in fact found his refuge in Sweden. And he said, if the mosques or these monuments of the foci meaning in the town are not restored at the same place, in the same shape as they were, with the same materials and expression, then it doesn't matter to me to live in Stolac or in Stockholm. Stolac is not anymore a town that I belong to. So these sort of research and contacts with people expressed the meaning of heritage for society, and especially for this traumatized society. The participatory reconstruction became a healing process in Stolac, and gradually it became a modus operandi across Bosnia. At this slide, you can see sites that were visited by experts of Commission to Preserve National Monuments, where they worked these physical works and recording and preparing projects out of their responsibility. So everything was extremely enthusiastic and huge, sort of dedication of all these persons, some of them students, some of them experts, some of them volunteers, some of them paid for something else to work. These are from Foča, from Trebanj, from Stolac, from different parts of Bosnia. Technology and budget have not been of crucial importance. Participatory reconstruction is soft, handmade, traditional knowledge-based reconstruction that does not exclude anyone. And at these slides, you can see that this participatory reconstruction was the reconstruction in which at the time I worked as an activist in this reconstruction, although I was assistant minister in Ministry for Physical Planning. But I took my holidays to start this very risky endeavor in Stolac when we were threatened by the extremists and hardliners. And people were trying to go back to sort of reclaim their right for the public space and for the expression, free expression of what they are, for their identity. And of course, they were building their resilience through rebuilding. And everyone was involved. My friends, my former students, returnees to Stolac, public figures that were coming from Sarajevo every Saturday and Sunday to help us. First day, there were 16 persons working at the site. In the 7 days, first Sunday, we had 160 persons coming. Mirsad Tuka is an actor, doctors, architects, electrical engineers, coffee owners, all of them were working there. My children, of course, were always with me, and now one of them is archaeologist, the other is dealing with environmental issues and human rights linked with the issue of resilience and sustainable development goals, and all of them are there. The third one is a cultural anthropologist dealing with the sort of cultural landscapes in Bosnia and their meaning for the resilience. Family members were helping me to take care after my children. Elders in Stolac were advising me about during this puzzle game to sort of reassemble the fragments of defragmented monuments, not only me, but the whole team that gathered around. And I would like to mention Medina Hadžihasanović, Leila Hadžić, that were the key persons, Nejat Bereja, very well-known figure in Stolac, who in fact is coffee owner and who said that he became so passionate about understanding which type of stone is the stone that he can see at the dumping sites and riverbeds where we were looking for fragments of destroyed monuments, that he could not go to the sea beach without looking if the pebbles are in fact fragments of some destroyed monuments. So this participatory approach is in fact something that helped the community to build resilience. Not fully, because the reconstruction in Stolac is still going on. And the pressure is still trying to stop the resilience, building resilience, and in fact to brought all the processes to the zero level where all the people were victimized and deprived of their memory, cultural memory. What seems as the most important issue at the stage. Today, the reconstruction in Stolac has a global significance. International Summer School on participative restoration of both tangible and intangible heritage brings together young people from all over the world every summer since 2005. We have celebrated our 15th anniversary at the online school at Zoom platform that has been organized in September this year. And at this sort of Jubilee school, 15 years, we had participants from 28 countries from across the world. Local conflict resolution has grown into establishment of the global network of young advocates for the universal language of heritage as a tool for dialogue. The context of post-war recovery in Bosnia pushed the reconstruction in the center of the peace, settlement, and building resilience. At this slide, you can see how the puzzle game was going on and how, in fact, in Žitomislići monastery, the team led by my colleague Milijana Okilj, or in Stolac, the team that was led by me and my former students here is Medina Hadžihasanović Katana, who is now completing doctoral studies in Berlin, and who is one of the leading experts on heritage in Bosnia. And also at the bottom, sort of right, you can see the people, the locals that were learning how to assemble the fragments and understand the buildings. So piece by piece, the reconstruction or rebuilding the monuments was the way of building resilience. So the power of heritage has been expressed in the restoration of Počitelj. That was a very serious endeavor financed by government of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and led by a team of experts during 6 years of implementation of the project. Then Jajce, where a lot of monuments were restored through the different kind of contributions. Cultural Heritage Without Borders was extremely important in this, raising awareness and providing proper methods and advices for the restoration, and also funds for the restoration of the most important buildings. Of course, such iconic buildings as the Ferhadija Mosque in Banja Luka that was leveled to the ground and fragments thrown into the different kind of the dumping sites and the river and the lake beds, led by Professor Amra Hadžimuhamedović. Ritual, symbolic, educational, restorative return. Reconstruction process is a form of self-recognition. The perception of authenticity manifested during the Bosnian reconstruction gives a huge ethnographic material for the future research of contextuality and authenticity, and also for the future research of the significance of heritage for society. These are my students, my former students. Now they are all experts in conservation from the Academy of Fine Arts at the site of Al-Aqsa Mosque during its reconstruction. Understanding that reconstruction of destroyed heritage is a way to come to terms with past crimes. Reconstruction is simply a just, but to achieve it, you have to have a technical knowledge as well. So the question that we come to when we are faced with a trauma and the demand for building resilience is whom to protect heritage for. This question, of course, is open at every corner of the world that I visited. So when I was teaching in Nablus and wandering around, roaming around the town, trying to absorb the beauty of 1,000-year-old structures, I found at the wall of a mosque, wonderful mosque in the center, this poster, the huge key that is a symbol of the right of Palestinian people, right and destiny of Palestinian people for return. And while I was standing there and looking at it, it in fact revoked or recalled some extremely important memories. And Leila, I will now ask you to record the music. This is a song that is performed by Flora Jagoda from Sarajevo and Vlasenica, a Bosnian American. You can continue like a recording if it is okay.
su casa, de España, de España. De su casa, de España, de España. Sueños de España, sueños de España.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you very much. So the translation to English of the wonderful Ladino words, and Ladino can be considered as Bosnian heritage because it has been maintained, kept in the Bosnian Jewish community since 16th century, when they were forced after the Granada Edict in 1492 to either choose death or conversion to Christianity, or to be expelled from their homes. And the huge groups of those who wanted to preserve their identity and also to preserve their lives, they were leaving their homeland, taking their keys of their homes as some kind of hope that they will go back and that their lives will be brought back into the condition in which they were safe, they were what they wanted to be, and had this choice. They found refuge in Bosnia, where the wonderful concept of the accepting refugees in Grand Courtyard or Velika Avlija, which was built as a refugee center for them, in which refugees could stay. They had also their temple, the oldest temple in Sarajevo from 16th century, in this part of the center of town, integrated among the other important structures very close to Begova Mosque and the old Orthodox Church. They could use their sort of apartments or the rooms in this refugee center until they start providing the profit from the business that they were able to perform at the ground floor, where they had a possibility to open their shops, workshops, etc. And then they were asked either to pay rent or to free or make a vacant their room for the new refugees to be accepted. This is a very sustainable sort of way of accepting refugees that we had in Sarajevo in 16th century. And the way how this community, in fact, contributed to the complex culture and cultural diversities of Bosnia is extremely important. The part of that Bosnian heritage is, in fact, that these Jewish families were keeping the keys in their drawers, in kashons, and kashon is one of the Bosnian words that came from Ladino, in the kashons as some kind of a link with their parents and grandparents, and that hope that the home still exists, and the home is symbolized in that key. So it was some kind of building resilience through the symbol of restorative past. And someone is joining us. That's beautiful. At this photo, you can also see the hand of one of those leading persons in the reconstruction of Stolets, keeping the key. The first thing that we excavated on Tuesday, 21st of August, 2001, when we started discovering or excavating the preserved foundation of Čaršijska Mosque. When we found the key on that day, it also symbolized the hope of return and the recovery. So this strong symbol is also kept across the world. The home, the shape of home, the place is in fact the hope that it can be restored, is building resilience of people. This is a Shuba village in Palestine that was in fact depopulated in 1948. I worked there with my students for more than a decade now. And this is a lady that was not born in Shuba village, but still finds that this house without a door and the key that she still keeps, that was given to her by her parents, is in fact the center of her world. The point zero, as Otto Friedrich Bollnow says, of all her movements and achievements in the world. And these group of people that lived in a village, Shuba, and the other villages close to Jerusalem, visit them every year just to touch the ground in their prayers and just to visit their houses, believing that the doors will be unlocked once. So the key transmitted through generations as a heart of the home is a thread that gives a hope that scattered parts of destinies and can be put together again in a meaningful shape of life. It is a heart of home even when the home does not have a door anymore. The process of return, and when I say return, I mean reinstallment of uprooted people in the world, is possible until home exists, at least as a space. This is the image that shows, in fact, and shows one of the most dramatic places in the world that lives under the constant, the people in that place live under the constant pressure. It's Hebron. People in Hebron live surrounded by the wires. There are parts of the town where they can not go in. The street, the Golden Souk, is one that they cannot enter. They approach the mosque, the central mosque, through different kind of checkpoints that are extremely stressing and frightening. And still, they build their resilience. So let me show these are the wires. And can you guess what is this? This is the way how dignity of these people is preserved. The house that has lost, the people from this house lost their right to enter to the house because the whole street is blocked and forbidden for Palestinians to move through. And the entrances, the gates to their houses are at that street. So they converted the windows into the entrances. And I was there while this person, this lady who found her son to open the window for her to enter her house through the window, still keeping the key of the gate, hoping that it will be opened once they was saving the dignity and not leaving the house, being under the constant threat that the soldiers enter the house and expel them from it. The process of return is ever ongoing for the inhabitants of Hebron, who are not allowed to enter a street, who are not allowed to move through their town, and who are always under the threat to lose the home. So every day, every instance of time, they are in the process of return, longing to build a full resilience in the condition of peace. Inside the community, the reconstruction was performed as a ritual. a Bosnian heritage community, complementing in a way the rituality of its destruction and mourning. Those who experience the destruction of the bridge as a symbol of all their personal losses participated in its reconstruction, directly or indirectly, as well as those who experience destruction of heritage sites all over the Bosnia. One seeking to reveal the intangible dimension of a physical construction, the second seeking to incarnate an intangible form of heritage in a material object. And what we can conclude from the experience that we have after the war trauma in Bosnia, the trauma in which still we are diving or hopefully swimming, is that when inanimate objects are destroyed and people want to survive, restoration of heritage becomes the tool of coming to terms with the past abuses. The centrality shift from object to people introduces people in between conservation specialist and object as a catalyst of the professional responsibility. And thank you very much for being patient and listening to me.
Okay, thank you, Amra, for your wonderful presentation. Now it's the time to just see if the audience has some questions. We would like to open up the floor. So for anyone on Zoom and also on Facebook, if you have questions for Amra, feel free to ask her out loud, or you can also type into the chat and I would be glad to read them out loud for you. Okay, we have a question coming up from Nicola. Nicola says, incredible, love how the terms are used accurately to point out the importance of resilience. As well, the connection between these terms perfectly explains the much needed process of cultural preservation. Much thanks for the great lecture. So it's more of a
Nicola.
Nicola, not so much a question, but a great comment. Thank you so much, Nicola. Anyone else, feel free to type in your questions and I will read them out to Amra. And maybe in the meantime, if it's okay, I would ask Amra just a quick question. My question to you, well, I have two questions, but let's start maybe with the first one. And I think I wanted to kind of go back to that point you were talking about, Reidler-Meyer being in court and kind of put, like, let's say, being put in his place as the architect or as the expert to his expertise field, in many sense limiting the power of architects and also architecture to act as witnesses in the criminal courts when it comes to genocide and like, because this is part of a genocide, the systematic destruction that is definitely part of a genocide. So I guess my question to you would be, just looking at some other practices that are kind of starting up in the world, and like, for example, one of them being like what the work that I.L. Wiseman's doing at Goldsmiths. You know, they've established this forensic lab and they're trying to use architecture as a way of like making it into a forensic science so that it can be admissible at trials and courts and whatnot. So it could be used in kind of a systematic way. I guess it doesn't become so objective or subjective, right? So my question to you would be, first of all, how did, or because my knowledge is not so, let's say, large on the area of the trials that happened after the war in Bosnia, like what role did architects and architecture play? Has it been used in like, in your opinion, as a tool to prove certain points, like the acts of genocide? And also, if not, then in what way could it have been done differently? Or perhaps, you know, now with the reconstructions going on, much of the material has been lost, or much of the evidence has been lost, I assume. So because you're an expert in this area, I'm really curious to hear your stance on this. Thank you.
Amra Hadžimuhamedović, although he was not the only expert witness to the Hague Court, International Court for the Crimes in former Yugoslavia, was in fact the one who did the most thorough research, and he in fact developed database of destruction on cultural heritage in Bosnia in several trials that were going in front of the tribunal. So the very trials, you know, when it was going against Šešelj or Karadzic and so on, limited his research. So the part of his research is made out of these trials, because he started visiting the sites before the end of the war. He did some also research in Kosovo, and he was also expert witness for Kosovo. So this is the huge material that is extremely important for understanding, and the way how he put it and how he analyzed and commented it to understand the meaning of cultural heritage. And it has become so in both destroying the community through this kind of physical destruction to push into the oblivion cultural memory of a certain group, and also through its restoration to build the resilience of a certain group. So when he was interrupted by Judge Higgins, he was very resolution making concerning the meaning of what he was and the importance of what he was stating. And he said, it's not about the bricks and mortars, it's always about the people. These monuments were not destroyed to dismantle some physical structures, but to dismantle people's links between the people, and to destroy a certain groups of people, to annihilate them. So it was I can say that in a lot of sort of trials, cultural heritage was considered. And what is extremely important in these Yugoslavian trials is that a huge body of material has been produced to be studied, to be analyzed. And I hope that a lot of genocide scholars, etc., will work. They have started working on that. Some of us, we are writing about that, but that it will continue being a source for the research, for the some kind of the final decisions of the tribunal. They also could be analyzed. I analyzed several of them, especially the one concerning the Mostar Bridge. And it is extremely important to understand that, for example, the international legal instruments like the Hague Convention, that is a convention about the protection of cultural heritage in the face of war and armed conflicts, how it is in fact restrictive instrument. There are some terms like military necessities that are so plastic that you can sort of understand the military necessity as anything. For example, the judge who in fact was against the decision that Mostar Bridge was a war crime, and he wrote the explanation at some several hundred pages, while Mostar Bridge was not was a legitimate war target. He was explaining the destruction of Mostar Bridge made the other side, the opposite side, weaker, as well as destruction of all the mosques in Mostar. That the very destruction demoralized the enemy of those who were destroying, and that made the Mostar Bridge legitimate or military necessity, because once when it was destroyed, they collapsed as a sort of enemy. Their strength was diminishing. So what is military necessity is something that has to be conventionalized in the future. And I hope that there are a lot of some kind of attempts in the community. Yesterday we had a wonderful webinar organized by Polish Ministry of Culture, Polish government, and UNESCO participated, ICOMOS participated, ICROM, and Arab Regional Center for World Heritage. So at this webinar, Lazare Lendo, who is in fact directly responsible for the responses in when some kind of the accidents happen concerning the heritage, including armed conflicts and different kind of disasters, like responding to hazardous events, either man-made or natural-made, is very much aware of the need to develop some kind of the instruments that will enable the criminal tribunal in future to come easier to the final decisions and to understand how important heritage is in all of this. And I have to mention that there is one decision of the International Crime Tribunal against one of the leaders, military leaders of this hardline party during the conflict in Mali. It was decided that he was guilty for the war crimes and crimes against humanity because of destruction of heritage and burning down the manuscripts that were also designated as a heritage. So immediately after or during this process, 16 mausoleums that were destroyed by his troops and that he was commander of were restored, and he in fact was a sort of sentenced to I don't know how long prison.
Okay, but there was a concrete, I guess, what do you call it? Sentence based on the architectural evidence, which is kind of a positive step forward. Thank you, Amra. Thank you so much for your answer. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions, and I know it's getting a bit late. And so Amra, I really, in front of Kuma International, in front of me and Claudia, we really want to thank you for being our guests tonight. It was such a pleasure, and it was a great lecture. So thank you, and we hope that we will also host you in the future, and hopefully in person as well, when the situation is a little bit, let's say, better than the current state of affairs. And we also want to take this moment to thank all the participants, people who have joined us via Zoom, people who are watching us on Facebook. Thank you so much for being with us. And this concludes our third week of our Architecture Month at Kuma International. Next week, we are talking about resilience and divisions. So next week, we have Igor Kovac and Nasiha Pozder with us. So we hope that all of you can also join us next week. In the meantime, Claudia also says, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. And then we have Azra Dobrevich, who says, thank you for this amazing lecture. It was a pleasure listening to you. Kind regards. So having said that, Amra, thank you once again in front of all of us for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Leila, for inviting me, and Claudia for letting me sharing some of my experience and thoughts with you. And I'm very grateful to all participants who were patient enough to listen in this time and hour. And thank you for the wonderful comments that I'm receiving. What I'm very much looking forward is to listen to Igor Kovac and Nasiha Pozder, who are my dear colleagues that I respect very much, and that gives some hope that things will change in this final phase of recovery of Sarajevo and Bosnia. And I believe that what you are working and this project bringing the important issues to the stage is something that needs to go on, and I wish you all success and the best support that you can get from those that are giving support to this kind of important project.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. So have a good evening, everyone, and see you on Tuesday.